June 1940, facing the German army, France is collapsing. After breaching the front in the Ardennes, the panzers of Guderian and Rommel are racing across France. Aware of the catastrophe taking shape, one man will do everything in his power to speed up the building of a ship that is, for now, nothing more than an unfinished hull sitting in a dry dock, the Jean Bart. For weeks, thousands of workers and sailors will pour their heart and soul into an extraordinary race against the clock. Today, I bring you the incredible escape of the battleship Jean Bart. May 1931. This is the heartquake in European capitals. Weimar Germany, and is still bound by the Treaty of Versailles, launches a next-generation warship designed to sink British commerce. With this new vessel, the naval arms race, one of the triggers of the First World War, resumes. France responds in 1934 by laying down the Dunkirk and the Strasbourg, two fast battleships of 26,000 tons. For several years, a competition unfolds between the Germans, French, and Italians to build the most powerful, fastest, and heaviest ship. In 1935 and 1936, France lays down two 35,000-ton battleships, the Richelieu and the Jean Bart. The Jean Bart is scheduled for delivery at the start of 1941. But to build all of this, dry docks are needed. And in 1936, amid massive rearmament, no existing dock is available for the Jean Bart. One has to be created from scratch. The Penhoet shipyard at Saint Nazaire is chosen. In 1939, the work is unfinished, and more importantly, the dock is not yet connected to the Loire River and hence to the open sea. A channel must be cut and the shallows dredged for several hundred meters to give the battleship enough water to reach the Loire and then the Atlantic. The estimated completion date for the works that would allow the ship to leave Saint Nazaire, the 1st of October, 1940. 5th of December 1939. With war declared just a few months earlier, Captain Pierre-Jean Ronarc takes command of the Jean Bart to oversee the final stages of construction. On his arrival, work is progressing well. The front is quiet. Ronarc receives news like any ordinary Frenchman, through the press and official communiqué. But on 13th of May 1940, General Guderian's panzers pierce the front in the Ardennes. 16th May, the French front collapses. The public communiqué remains vague, but Ronarc understands that the situation is concerning. Anxious for France and for his ship, he realizes the Jean Bart could soon be within range of German aircraft. He immediately sets his mind to sailing as soon as possible and begins cataloging the obstacles. The main one is, of course, the channel. Between the dock and the river, and freedom, stand tons of silt and rock. On the morning of 18th of May, after a sleepless night, Ronarc summons his second-in-command and the engineer Gasquet, who is in charge of the yard. Together, they review the priority programs to be carried out to prevent the battleship from being captured. The engines, of course, the electrical supply, the armament. They agree on 20 June, the date of the next spring tide, as the deadline. 1 month. If the Germans are not there before then, 1 month. 1 month to fit the indispensable equipment, propellers, steering gear, boilers. 1 month to dredge the exit of the dock and connect it to the Loire River. 1 month before the next spring tide. After that deadline, the tide will hold the battleship until 5th of July, Spring tides occur with the alignment of the moon, the sun, and the earth. Spring tides produce the highest high waters and the lowest low waters. Since the dredgers will not have time to cut very deep, the ship must set sail at the moment of maximum water depth. Quite simply, modifying a project of this scale, this quickly, with so many different parties involved, is challenge in itself, and Ronarch must obtain the agreement of ministers in Paris. Jumping on a train, Ronarch arrives at naval headquarters on 22nd of May. Amid crates of archives being prepared for evacuation and officers readying themselves to leave, Ronarch explains his predicament and obtains the necessary support. By the time his train leaves Paris, the Germans are at the gates of Amiens, and the Allied armies are encircled before Dunkirk. The Jean Bart is 248 meters long and 35 meters wide, with a draft estimated at 9.70 meters once work is complete. But the channel can never be dredged deeply enough by 20 June to accommodate such a draft. So, if digging deeper is not an option, the ship must be lightened to the bare minimum. Every 6,000 tons of material or fuel causes the vessel to sit 1 additional meter lower in the water. After careful calculation, Gasquet estimates a draft of 8.10 meters for 20 June. Following the minister's intervention, the engineer Durepaire now takes charge of dredging. Ronarch asks him for a minimum channel width of 70 meters, but given the time constraints, Durepaire replies that he can only dredge a maximum width of 50 meters. As for depth, Durepaire promises a sounding of 3.50 meters along the full length of the channel. The soundings, each the figures printed on the chart, represent the depth at the theoretical extreme, low water. The tide tables give a water height that must be added to this sounding to obtain total depth. High water on 20 June is given as 5 meters, meaning that, combined with the dredged depth of 350 meters, the total water depth will be 8.50 meters. 850 meters of water depth minus 8.10 meters of draft means the Jean Bart will have only 40 centimeters under her keel. For Ronarch, this is impossible. 7.5 meters either side and 40 centimeters beneath the hull. Impossible to maneuver in these conditions. But these are the conditions imposed by events, by the war, by the threat of capture. The dredging plan is revised so that the axis connecting to the Loire is as short as possible. A fan must be cut to allow the 248-meter battleship to pivot at the exit of the dock before entering a channel of nearly 1 kilometer. To make this possible, 2 large dredgers work around the clock, 2 crews relieving each other every 12 hours, to dig and widen the channel. While France collapses through the month of June 1940, 3,500 workers from the Penhoë and Loire shipyards, cut off from the outside world, are engaged in a race against the clock to get the Iron Giant underway. On the 7th of June, the day the Germans cross the Somme, the propellers are fitted. On the 11th, as the government leaves Paris for Tours and then Bordeaux, the boilers are completed. On the 16th, at the moment Albert Lebrun, President of the Republic, designates Philippe Pétain as President of the Council, the rudder is installed. To lighten the ship, Ronarch decides to sacrifice one of the 2 main 15-inch turrets. Meanwhile, the dredging continues day and night. Inevitably, breakdowns occur, and air raid alerts disrupt the work. Deadlines stretch. On 15th of June, the channel is announced ready for the 19th. But on the 17th, Durepaire finally pushes the deadline back to 20 June, and the Germans are closing. In the event the Germans arrived before the ship could sail, Ronarch has a Maginot Line constructed to defend the approaches to the yard. Access is restricted, barricades are erected, and young recruits practice their marksmanship. Measures for honor's sake, to slow the enemy if the ship had to be scuttled.
C'est le cœur serré que je vous dise aujourd'hui qu'il faut cesser le combat.
17 June noon. This is the shock in Saint Nazaire. The French learn by radio that the government is requesting an armistice and calling on the country to cease fighting. The news spreads and the workers stop, incredulous. But immediately, Ronark walks the yard and remobilizes workers and sailors alike. The Jean Bart will sail. The Germans are now 40 kilometers from Saint Nazaire, and since the previous day, the Luftwaffe has been overflying the area, attacking railway stations and convoys. On this 17th of June, the quays of Saint Nazaire are swarming with British soldiers fleeing France. 4 kilometers from the quayside, 80 ships are at anchor in the estuary to evacuate thousands of British troops, among them the RMS Lancastria, with nearly 9,000 soldiers and civilians on board. At 4 p.m., just as the pack liner sets sail for England, a squadron of German bombers attacks and sinks the ship. The sinking claims between 4,000 and 6,000 lives, one of the greatest maritime catastrophe of the 20th century. The threat to the Jean Bart has never been so close. 18 June 9th a.m. By telephone, Admiral Riel tells Ronark to sail on the 3 p.m. tide. The Germans are coming.
Impossible, Admiral. The lock gate is not open. Departure is planned in 48 hours. The channel is not finished. Do your best,
replies the Admiral and hangs up. The 3 p.m. tide is out of the question. The next one is at 4 a.m. in the morning, meaning a night departure, in 19 hours instead of the 40 planned. Fortunately, the channel has been dredged to 350 meters all the way to the estuary. That is depth enough, but much work remains in front of the lock, which will have to be dredged until the very last moment. On the other hand, Durepair announces that the Jean Bart will not have 50 meters of width to pass through, but only 45. A 45 meters wide channel for a ship 35 meters wide, lacking navigation instruments and whose engines cannot be tested. A channel whose boundaries will not be visible because the buoys are not equipped with lights. Departure had been planned in daylight. On 18th of June, while dozens of French warships leaves Brest and Lorient to avoid being seized, the Jean Bart takes on her final supplies. A total of 500 tons, calculated to the nearest so as not to exceed 8.10 meters of draft. Enough to sail until the Atlantic Ocean, but she will need to be resupplied at sea very promptly to avoid running dry off the coast. Noon. The quayside and the ship are in a frenzy of activity. Rumors place the Germans in Nantes. Battle stations. The barricades are manned, the naval infantry at their posts, backed by an army company. 2 p.m. Since nothing can be tested before departure, the Jean Bart cannot rely on her engines to leave the dock and reach the channel. 3 tugs are tasked with the maneuver. Ronark hopes the wind will not pick up. The current, for its part, should be nil during the maneuver. The start of the maneuver is set for 02:30 in the morning. 2:30 p.m. The lookouts spot a motorized column in the distance. They're coming. 3 p.m. Some speak of blowing up the Meon Bridge to slow the Germans. Others want to scuttle the Jean Bart, make its ship unusable. Ronark makes certain that no act of scuttling will be carried out without his express order, and the colors are hoisted for the first time. 4 p.m. External communications are no longer working. The motorized column is entering the outskirts of Saint Nazaire, but from the top of the Jean Bart, the lookouts see no exchange of fire. The column is not German, it is British. For months, the yard has been supplying the battleship with electricity. At the moment of becoming self-sufficient, the electricians have had no time to calibrate the circuit breakers, which break. The ship is plunged into darkness. The ventilation stops, making the engine spaces uninhabitable. An emergency dynamo must be started in order to reset the circuit breakers. The engineers must wait another hour before they can re-enter the engine compartments, the time needed for the temperature to drop, and then restart the main boilers for departure. The incident repeats itself several times during the afternoon. Warming the boilers is impossible for the moment. 6 p.m. The propeller shafts are at last connected to the turbine shafts. 7 p.m. The gyro compass is finally delivered, in pieces. Too late to assemble it. The Jean Bart will navigate by sight. Another problem, the ship is listing. She is heeling to port with a resulting draft of 8.25 meters amidships to port against 8.05 meters amidships to starboard. Under normal circumstances, this list would not be very serious. But for the Jean Bart on this particular night, correction is imperative. From 22 Han to Euro 145, Gasquet has tons of fuel transferred from port tanks to starboard tanks so that the weight shift can rebalance the ship. 250 tons of liquid ballast to correct by a few degrees a vessel of 35,000 tons. 1 hour before departure, the ship is very nearly on an even keel. 2:30 a.m. After a few hours of rest, Ronarch climbs to the bridge, pitch black. Hidden by a thick layer of cloud, the hoped-for moon is nowhere to be seen. The gangway is raised, the crews are ready. A new problem, the tugs are not at the rendezvous. The Jean Bart is alone. Spotting small lights far ahead of the lock, Ronarch sees through his binoculars 2 tugs refloating the third. The ship has been self-sufficient on electricity for only 30 minutes. The electricians have finally stabilized the circuit breaker panel with a wooden wedge. A dangerous bodge that could cause a serious fire, but for now it is the only solution. Ten past 3 a.m. The tugs at last enter the lock and hook onto the battleship. High water is at 04 a.m. The tide will begin to ebb 15 minutes later. After 05 way, the water level will be too low to reach the Loire Channel. The margin has been eaten into by the grounding of the tug Minotaur. Fortunately, conditions are favorable. The wind has not picked up. 20 past 3 a.m., pitch black. The maneuver begins. The moment of truth. On the maneuvering officer's orders, the sailors let the hawsers run. The tow lines come taut, and the iron giant moves forward slowly. Immediately upon leaving the lock, the Jean Bart must pivot to the south. The fan-shaped basin is approximately 280 meters across, 30 meters more than the battleship. Only the Minotaur can hold back the tens of thousands tons of the Jean Bart. But her inertia carries the Colossus beyond the dredge limit, and her bow runs gently aground in the mud. Ronarch is virtually blind, no lights, no compass, and can barely make out the bow of his own ship. With the tide still rising, the Jean Bart pulls herself free of the mud easily. The tugs maneuver, but the battleship runs aground a second time. 4:30, daybreak. For over 30 minutes, all 5 tugs have been giving everything they have. The battleship starts to move. The Jean Bart is at last torn free from the mud and enters the channel. Not a moment too soon, the tide has begun to ebb. The battleship begins her transit at 4 knots, 10 centimeters of clearance on each side, hemmed in by the tugs. "20 minutes pass in a deathly silence, everyone expecting another grounding. But nothing happened. After 1 kilometer, the ordeal is over. The ship is in the Loire. "20 to 5 a.m. Just as the ship engages in the channel, German bombers swoop down on the Jean Bart. Every machine gun and artillery piece in the sector opens fire to come to the aid of the French battleship, which is unable to maneuver. The first bombs fall wide. No damage is reported, but the skipper of one of the tugs panics and casts off his tow line. The bomber's second pass also fails, but the Jean Bart is vulnerable. Fortunately, for the past 10 minutes, the boilers are finally ready. A lone Heinkel comes back for a third pass and strikes her with a bomb between the 2 turrets, before being chased off by French aircraft. The damage is minor, a 20-centimeter hole, no casualties. The first orders ring out on the bridge. The order repeaters transmit the command to the engines. Aft, a churning wake appears. The tugs are released, and the battleship continues on her way to freedom. Carried by her engines in the ebbing tide, the Jean Bart makes 12 knots. The area must be cleared as fast as possible. It is 05 awash in the morning, the sun is rising, and the Jean Bart has been spotted by the Luftwaffe. As she passes the last 2 buoys of the Loire, the Jean Bart enters the Atlantic Ocean. A month earlier, she had been nothing but an almost empty hull. On 21st of June 1940, while German officers are inspecting the empty dock, the Jean Bart, escorted by several torpedo boats, is sailing down the Portuguese coast and heading for Casablanca, where she arrives the following day around 5 p.m. The ship remained at dock until the end of the conflict. Returning fire against American forces from 8 to 11 hours in November 1942, during torch operation, she was seriously damaged by bombardment. But that is another story, another episode to come.